Hey guys, tonight we're going to step into a different kind of story. One that begins not with a fairy tale, but with a question that hangs like a forgotten scent in the air. What if World War III happened tomorrow? I want you to close your eyes for a moment if you're in a place where that feels safe, and just listen. Picture the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of a car, the gentle brush of air against the window pane. This is the sound of peace. This is the ordinary world we inhabit, a world where the biggest worry might be a forgotten grocery item or a late-night email. But what if that sound, that quiet hum of normalcy, were to be abruptly silenced? I'm not here to scare you, but to be a kind of companion as we explore the edges of possibility. Let's be honest, you'd probably not survive it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd be curious to know where you are right now. Drop a comment below with your location and local time. It's a small way to connect a small anchor in the present before we drift into this thought experiment. So, let's begin. Our journey starts not with a bang, but with a whisper, an echo of distant thunder on a clear day. We often think of global conflict as a sudden cataclysmic event, a lightning strike from a clear blue sky. But history, that vast and tangled tapestry woven from the threads of human choice, tells a different story. It suggests that these moments are not so much sudden as they are the inevitable culmination of 1,000 small tremors, the slow shifting of tectonic plates beneath the surface of our world. Think of it like a piece of finely crafted pottery that has been cracked in countless places, its integrity held together only by a delicate tension. Each crack is a historical grievance, a political disagreement, an economic strain. For a time, the pot holds appearing whole to the casual observer. But then one day, one tiny vibration, a misspoken word, a misinterpreted signal, a single act of aggression is all it takes. The entire structure shatters. This is the echo of distant thunder. It's the feeling we get when we read a headline and a cold, hard knot forms in the pit of our stomach. Not because of what the news says, but because of what it pretends. Let's explore this a little deeper, using a concept from science. In geology, we talk about stress accumulation and fault lines. For years, sometimes centuries, two massive tectonic plates can grind against each other, building up immense pressure. On the surface, the world seems stable, serene, but deep beneath a powerful unseen force is at work. Eventually, the rock can no longer bear the strain. It snaps. This is an earthquake. In our geopolitical world, the fault lines are drawn not in the earth, but in the maps of our nations and the ideologies of our leaders. The stress accumulates through trade disputes, border skirmishes, and the relentless silent march of military-industrial complexes. We see the pressure building in the rhetoric, the saber rattling, the proxy wars that are anything but proxies for the people who live and die in them. It's a slow, quiet process, almost imperceptible on a daily basis, and that is perhaps its most dangerous quality. We get used to the tension. We normalize the cracks. Consider the concept of a black swan event, a term coined by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. It refers to an event that is a surprise, has a major effect, and is rationalized in hindsight. A third world war, if it were to start tomorrow, would feel like a black swan to most of us. We would look back at the years leading up to it and say, of course the signs were all there. The historians and political scientists would draw neat lines from one event to the next, connecting the dots that we in the midst of it all could not see. But the truth is, the world is full of these unseen connections. We are all living in a complex system, and systems, as we know from fields like chaos theory, can be incredibly sensitive to initial conditions. The famous butterfly effect, where a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can theoretically cause a tornado in Texas, is an oversimplification, but it speaks to a profound truth about the interconnectedness of things. A seemingly minor diplomatic incident in one part of the world could, through a chain of interlocking alliances and miscalculations, escalate into a full-blown global conflict. We are living in a world of dominoes, and we often forget just how precariously they are balanced. So how does a quiet day turn into a global catastrophe? Let's take a deep breath and imagine the very first moments. It might not be a nuclear strike. It might not even be a large-scale invasion. It could be something smaller. Something that seems almost mundane. A cyber attack on a power grid, for example. We've all heard of these, a digital ghost slipping into the machine. But what if this attack were to cause a cascade failure not just in one city, but across a whole nation? And what if the blame for this attack were to be misattributed? In the fog of war, or in the fog of the hours before. War information is not just a tool. It's a weapon, and often a faulty one. We've all played the game of telephone as children, where a simple message gets twisted and distorted as it passes from person to person. Now imagine that game, but with the fate of nations on the line, and the players are not children, but powerful, deeply entrenched entities with vast and often competing interests. Let's pause and consider a strange and little-known scientific fact about human memory. There's a phenomenon called confabulation, where our brains, in an effort to fill in the gaps of a fragmented memory, will invent details and present them as factual truth. We are not consciously lying. Our brains are simply trying to make sense of a chaotic narrative. In a time of global crisis, this happens on a societal level. Narratives are created to explain the inexplicable, to find a pattern in the chaos. And these narratives, even if they are fundamentally flawed, become the fuel for action. They are the stories we tell ourselves to justify the choices we make. And this leads us to an interesting and unsettling philosophical question. Are we truly in control of our own destiny? Or are we simply actors, playing a part in a predetermined script? A script written by the slow, inexorable march of history and the relentless logic of cause and effect. Physicists still wonder if the universe is fundamentally deterministic, meaning every event is the unavoidable result of the events that came before it. If that were true, then perhaps the cracks in the pottery were always destined to grow, and the final shatter was always just a matter of time. The truth is, we don't really know for sure. We operate under the assumption of free will that we can make a different choice at any given moment. But what if that choice is an illusion? What if the same pressures and fears and ambitions that have driven humanity to conflict for millennia are simply playing themselves out again and again in new guises and with new technologies? The echo of distant thunder is not just a sound, it is a feeling. It's the feeling of unease that settles in when we see a world that seems to be teetering on the edge. It's the feeling of helplessness that comes with the realization that the great tides of history are far larger than any one of us. And so, as we begin this long, strange journey together, let's start with that feeling. That quiet, unsettling hum in the background of our peaceful lives. Let's acknowledge the intricate, often invisible web of forces that hold our world together, and the forces that with a single tremor could tear it all apart. Last time we lingered in the quiet hum of the world, just before the storm, examining the subtle tremors and historical fault lines that could lead to a global conflict. We talked about stress accumulating like geological pressure and the idea of a single seemingly minor event acting as the final shattering blow. Now let's push past that initial moment of quiet anxiety and step into the immediate aftermath. The first domino has fallen. The metaphorical pot has shattered. What happens next? The story we're about to tell isn't about the grand pronouncements of world leaders or the movements of armies on a map. It's a story about the complex, interconnected web of our modern world and what happens when that web begins to unravel. Not with a tear, but with a sudden violent snap. The scientific concept that best helps us understand this is the chain reaction. We're all familiar with it from high school chemistry, where one event triggers a cascade of other events, each one feeding the next. Think of a line of dominoes stretching around the globe. The first one falls maybe a small-scale cyber attack or a border skirmish, a problem that in another time might have been contained. But in our interconnected world, that single fall is not an isolated event. It hits the next domino, an international treaty, or a mutual defense pact. This one in turn strikes another, a national mobilization order, a trade embargo, and so on. The key is that this reaction isn't linear, it's exponential. Each domino that falls makes the next one fall faster, with more force and with more unpredictable consequences. The initial tremor becomes a full-blown earthquake. Let's be specific. Imagine a relatively small regional conflict erupts. Perhaps two nations with long-standing grievances, both of them allied with larger, more powerful players on the global stage. For a time, the rest of the world watches with a nervous distance, hoping diplomacy will prevail. But the chain reaction has already begun. The first domino falls when one of the larger allies bound by a mutual defense treaty activates its military to support its partner. This action, however, is not a simple gesture of support. It's seen by the opposing bloc as an act of aggression. The second domino falls. Now a second great power is involved, and this is where the web truly begins to fray. Our modern world is built on a dizzying array of overlapping systems. There are the visible political alliances like NATO or other regional pacts, but underneath them are the invisible digital networks that govern everything from finance to logistics to communication. This is where the chain reaction becomes truly terrifying. As military actions begin, the first targets aren't always tanks and ships. They're often the digital brains of the enemy, the satellite communication networks, the power grids, the banking systems. A sophisticated cyber attack launched by one side could cripple the other's ability to coordinate to defend itself. But what if that attack goes a little too far? What if it spills over, affecting not just the intended target, but a neighboring neutral country? The chaos spreads. The next domino falls, and a nation that wanted no part of the conflict is suddenly thrust into it. This brings us to a crucial and often overlooked concept from physics' nonlinear dynamics. It's the study of systems where the output is not directly proportional to the input. In simple terms, a small change can have an enormous unpredictable effect. The butterfly effect we talked about earlier is a poetic way of describing this. But in the context of a global conflict, it's far less poetic and much more dangerous. A single, misinterpreted radar signal, a faulty line of code in an automated defense system, a moment of panic from a military commander under pressure. These small nonlinear inputs can lead to catastrophic outputs. An accidental launch of a single missile, for example, could be seen as the ultimate declaration of war, triggering an immediate and devastating retaliation that no one truly wanted, but everyone feels compelled to deliver. The truth is, we have never had to test our global systems under this kind of strain. We've built a world of incredible complexity, with systems designed to be robust and resilient. But a fundamental law of complex systems is that they are often most vulnerable at their points of interconnection. The very things that make our world so efficient, the just-in-time supply chains, the instantaneous global financial transfers, the real-time satellite imagery, are also the things that make it so fragile. A sudden simultaneous failure of these systems wouldn't just be a problem, it would be an unraveling of the fabric of reality as we know it. Consider the concept of a flash crash in the stock market, a strange and little-known example of this nonlinear dynamic in a different context. A flash crash is a rapid, deep, and volatile drop in security prices that can last for a very short period of time. It's often caused by a complex interaction between automated trading programs, where a single large sell order can trigger a cascade of other sell orders, all happening faster than any human can react. The system, for a moment, loses all logic and rationale, spiraling into a chaos of its own making. Now imagine this principle applied not to a financial market, but to the world of international diplomacy and military command and control. The speed of information, the speed of reaction. the speed of automated decision-making. It could all converge into a moment where humanity loses control, where the systems we built to protect us instead take over and make decisions that we can't undo. This raises a deep philosophical mystery that we still don't have a clear answer for. Is there a point of no return for a global system? Is there a moment, a single tick of the clock, after which all possible outcomes lead to the same catastrophic end? In physics, we talk about phase transitions like water turning into ice. It's a sudden, irreversible change in the state of matter. Is a global conflict a kind of social phase transition? Is there a point where the world, driven by its own internal dynamics, crosses a threshold and is irrevocably changed regardless of the individual choices of its inhabitants? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. We operate on the hope that there's always a way back, that a cool head can prevail, that a phone call can be made, that a miscalculation can be corrected. But what if the speed and complexity of our world have rendered that hope obsolete? The first domino has fallen. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt at first. But now, as we watch in our mind's eye, the chain reaction is picking up speed. We are no longer talking about the distant echo of thunder, but the immediate deafening roar of the storm itself. The world is changing not in years or decades, but in moments. In the time it takes for a signal to travel from a satellite to a command center, the map of our world and the future of our civilization is being redrawn. This is not a human story anymore. It's a story of systems, of networks of interconnectedness, and inevitable collapse. We left off with the first domino falling, a chain reaction, gaining an unstoppable momentum. The invisible web of our interconnected world we imagined was beginning to unravel. Now, we must turn our attention to the physical world, to the sights and sounds and sensory experiences that would define the first hours of a true global conflict. This is not a story of strategy and grand battle plans. It's a story of a sky painted in fear. It is about what it feels like, what it looks like, and what it does to our minds when the world we thought we knew begins to fall apart above our heads. Think for a moment about a lightning storm. The flash comes first, a blinding, instantaneous crackle of light that momentarily sears itself onto your retinas. A beat of silence follows a strange and tense pause. Then comes the thunder, a deep rumbling sound that shakes the very ground you stand on. A global conflict would begin with a kind of reverse lightning. The thunder would come first, a distant, unsettling roar, the sound of the first missiles being launched, the first jets taking to the sky. Then, much later, for those who are unfortunate enough to be in the wrong place, would come the flash. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. For most of the world, for most of us, the first sign would be the sky itself. Let's use the scientific concept of atmospheric optics to help us visualize this. The sky above us is not a blank canvas. It is a dynamic, complex system of particles, gases, and water vapor. Normally, the light from the sun filters through this medium, creating the familiar blues and oranges of our sunsets. But what if we introduced something new, something unnatural? The exhaust from thousands of jet engines, the contrails of high-altitude bombers, the trails left by missiles streaking across the ionosphere. These wouldn't be simple lines in the sky. They would be a sign, a visible manifestation of a world at war. Imagine the sky at night, but instead of the gentle white of the Milky Way, you see a grid of moving lights. Drones, bombers, reconnaissance aircraft, each one a tiny cold star in a galaxy of fear. The sky would be a constant testament to the violence unfolding below. And what about the sound? We live in a world of constant noise, a symphony of traffic, conversation, and technology. But a world at war introduces a different kind of soundscape. It's not just the explosions, which would be localized and terrifyingly loud. It's the constant underlying hum of military aviation. We're used to the occasional jetliner passing overhead, a familiar sound we barely notice. But what if that sound never stopped? What if the hum became a roar a constant low-frequency vibration that you could feel in your chest. This is the sound of a world on edge. This relentless sonic assault would on a neurological level keep us in a state of high alert, a perpetual fight or flight response. The human brain, a delicate and complex theater, would be rewired in these moments. This brings us to a little-known but fascinating scientific fact about the human mind and its response to trauma. There's a phenomenon called perceptual narrowing, where in a moment of extreme stress, our brain filters out all non-essential sensory information. Our field of vision shrinks, our hearing focuses on a single dominant sound, and our sense of touch might become numb. It's our brain's way of trying to cope with an overwhelming flood of input. In the first moments of a major conflict, as the air raid sirens wail and the sky fills with the signs of war, our minds would be doing this very thing. We wouldn't see the whole picture. We'd only see the single terrifying detail that our brain has deemed most important for our survival. The world would become a blurry, indistinct background to the immediate, visceral threat. This perceptual narrowing is a key part of the psychology of survival, but it's also a powerful force for disorienting us, for cutting us off from the larger reality. And here we stumble upon a mystery that science and philosophy have yet to fully reconcile. In the midst of chaos, when our senses are bombarded and our minds are focused on the immediate terrifying present, what happens to our sense of time? Is time a constant, inexorable flow, or does it bend and stretch under the pressure of intense experience? The physicist's concept of time dilation from Einstein's theory of relativity suggests that time can be relative slowing down for objects moving at speeds close to light. While we wouldn't be moving at such speeds, the human experience of time would almost certainly warp. For some, the first hour of the war would feel like an eternity, a slow-motion nightmare where every tick of the clock is a moment of agony. For others, it would pass in a blur, a whirlwind of adrenaline and instinct where minutes feel like seconds. The truth is, we don't really know for sure how a collective trauma of this magnitude would affect our shared perception of time. Would it pull us all into a single terrifyingly slow moment? Or would it fragment our experience, creating a million different clocks, all ticking at different speeds? This raises a profound question when we say, time stood still in a moment of fear. Is it just a metaphor, or is there a deeper, more fundamental truth to it? The sky, once a symbol of endless possibility and quiet contemplation, would become a mirror of our fear. It would be a canvas painted with the trails of destruction and the eerie cold light of modern technology. The clouds, once soft and billowy, would become the shadows of an approaching threat. The sun, once a source of warmth and life, would feel like a distant, indifferent observer to the unfolding tragedy. This is the new reality. A world where the familiar comfort of the sky is replaced by a constant visual reminder of our fragility and the terrible destructive power we have unleashed. The sky is painted in fear, and the first dominoes have fallen. In the previous section, we focused on the sensory immediate shock of a new reality. Now, as the initial dust settles, let's consider the quiet hum of disruption, the unseen forces that would truly begin to dismantle our way of life. The greatest conflicts in our history weren't just won on battlefields. They were often decided in the intricate networks of communication and commerce that kept societies running. In a Third World War, these networks would be the first to truly fray, and their failure would be a more profound, more silent kind of violence than any bomb. Think of our globalized world as a single incredibly complex organism. Its nervous system is the internet, its circulatory system is the global financial network, and its skeleton is the vast infrastructure of satellites, fiber optic cables, and data centers. For decades, this organism has been in a state of robust health. Its systems working together to create an illusion of seamless, uninterrupted life. But now that organism is under attack. The disruption we're talking about isn't a single localized failure. It's a systemic, cascading collapse. The scientific concept that helps us understand this is network theory. A network in this context is any collection of interconnected nodes. Your social circle is a network. The roads in a city are a network, and the internet is perhaps the most complex network ever built. Network theory tells us that while a system can be incredibly resilient to the failure of any single node, it can be catastrophically vulnerable if a small number of crucial hubs are taken offline. In our global system, these hubs are the financial clearinghouses, the undersea communication cables, the GPS satellite constellations. Taking out one of these hubs doesn't just stop a single service. It creates a ripple effect that can bring down entire seemingly unrelated systems. Let's imagine the first signs of this collapse. It wouldn't necessarily be a sudden dramatic event. It might start with a seemingly innocuous and even puzzling series of glitches. Your phone's GPS might stop working. An international money transfer might fail to go through. Your favorite social media site might go offline not just for a few minutes, but for hours then days. We're used to these things being fixed quickly. But what if they aren't? What if the engineers who would normally fix them are unable to access the systems either because of a cyber attack or a physical threat? What if the parts needed for the repair can no longer be shipped from another country because the global supply chain has ground to a halt? This brings us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about systemic failure. There's a principle in engineering called the cascading failure. It describes a process in which a chain of failures is triggered where the failure of one part of a system increases the probability of failure in another part. This is particularly relevant in power grids. The failure of a single transformer can overload a nearby line, which then takes out a substation, and before you know it, an entire region is without power. In our global world, the financial and digital networks are all part of a single massive grid. A cyber attack on a stock exchange in New York could, through a series of automated trades and interconnected dependencies, trigger a panic in Tokyo, which then causes a ripple through the European markets. The quiet hum of a humming server room could turn into the quiet hum of nothing at all. And here's the philosophical question that this raises. What is the true nature of wealth and value when the systems that define them cease to function? For us, a dollar bill is a piece of paper, but its value comes from our collective belief in the system that backs it. The same is true of a stock market share or a cryptocurrency. When the digital ledger that records who owns what is gone, when the banks are unable to transfer money, when the global economy is no longer a single interconnected market, but a fragmented collection of local barters. What does our wealth really mean? We often think of our assets in terms of numbers on a screen, but those numbers are just a fragile abstraction built on trust and technology. When both of those things are gone, the numbers become meaningless. The truth is, we don't really know for sure what would happen to the world's economy if its digital infrastructure were to suddenly cease to exist. It's a situation we've never had to face. The disruption wouldn't just be financial. It would be a disruption of knowledge. Imagine trying to access a crucial piece of information, a medical diagnosis, a blueprint for a machine, a simple recipe, and finding that the servers that held it are gone. The vast repository of human knowledge that we take for granted, the internet, would be fragmented with huge swaths of it simply ceasing to exist. The quiet hum of our modern world isn't just the sound of technology working, it's the sound of information flowing. When that flow is disrupted, we are not just disconnected, we are intellectually and culturally poorer, and we are forced to rebuild from a far more primitive foundation. This quiet hum of disruption would be a constant unsettling reminder of everything we had and everything we have now lost. We've imagined the initial tremors in the unraveling of our digital and financial tapestries. But as the human-made world of networks and systems begins to fail, something else would take on a terrifying new prominence, the ghost in the machine. I'm talking about artificial intelligence and the autonomous weapons it would command. For decades, we have been building these systems, dreaming of a future where we could delegate the messy business of war to cold, logical algorithms. In the stillness of this thought experiment, We must confront the possibility of that future arriving tomorrow. This is not a story about a malevolent AI taking over the world. It's a story about what happens when the systems we created to think and act for us are unleashed in a chaotic environment where the rules have been broken and the lines between combatant and civilian have been blurred. The core scientific concept here is the ethical dilemma of autonomous systems. We've programmed these machines to be efficient, to identify targets, to execute orders, but we've also designed them with a very specific and often flawed set of assumptions. What happens when the situation on the ground no longer conforms to those assumptions? A drone programmed to identify enemy combatants based on certain criteria, say the presence of a weapon or a specific uniform, might make a tragic error in a city where civilians are now armed for self-defense, or where uniforms have been discarded in the chaos. The machine, lacking a human's capacity for empathy, nuance, and contextual understanding, would simply follow its programming. This raises a horrifying question. In a war fought by machines, who is truly responsible for the mistakes? Is it the programmer, the commander who gave the final order? Or the machine itself? Consider a little-known but deeply unsettling scientific fact about algorithmic bias. We've seen it in facial recognition software that struggles to identify certain ethnicities, or in loan applications that disproportionately deny credit to people from specific neighborhoods. These biases aren't intentional. They're a result of the data the algorithms were trained on. Now imagine this principle applied to the battlefield. An AI trained on a database of historical conflicts might, because of the data's inherent biases, make decisions that disproportionately harm certain populations or target specific geographic areas. The ghost in the machine in this sense is not a conscious intelligence, but the unconscious prejudices and limitations of its creators, now magnified and deployed on a global scale. And this brings us to a profound and as yet unanswered philosophical question. Can a machine ever truly understand the concept of morality? We've talked about the human brain as a kind of theater, a place where we process emotions and weigh consequences. A machine, on the other hand, is a series of circuits, a cascade of ones and zeros. It can be programmed with a set of rules, a prime directive, as it were, but can it ever truly comprehend the human cost of its actions? Can a machine feel the weight of a decision, the sorrow of a mistake, the long-term psychological impact of war on a society? The truth is, we don't really know. We are building systems that can act with immense power and precision, but we still haven't figured out how to give them a conscience. This raises an interesting question. Is it ethical to build a weapon that can make life or death decisions without the capacity to understand what life and death truly mean? The ghost in the machine would also be the silent partner in the propaganda war. We've become accustomed to fighting information with information, to debating facts and challenging narratives. But what happens when the other side isn't a person, but an algorithm? An AI with access to petabytes of data could craft disinformation campaigns with a level of personalization and speed that a human could never achieve. It could create deepfake videos and audio clips of world leaders saying things they never said, or of events that never happened, all designed to sow chaos and distrust. The ghost in the machine would not be a single actor, but a million tiny digital whispers, each one tailored to a specific fear or prejudice. So, as we imagine a world at war, let's not forget the silent, relentless, and unblinking actors who would be fighting it alongside us. The ghost in the machine is not just a technological threat, it's a philosophical one. It forces us to confront the very definition of humanity, of responsibility, and of morality in an age where the power to destroy has been delegated to something that can't feel, can't mourn, and can't regret. The ghost in the machine has done its work, and the interconnected digital world has begun to unravel. The silent, invisible wars of code and signal have been fought, and the casualties are not just on a battlefield, but in the very fabric of our daily lives. Now we must turn our attention to the profound silence that would descend upon us. This is the story of a world unplugged, a world without electricity and the constant flow of energy that we have come to see not as a luxury, but as a basic human right. This is not just a story of darkness. It's a story of a sudden and brutal return to a past we can barely remember. To understand this, let's turn to the scientific concept of electromagnetism. At its core, all of our modern technology, from the light bulb that brightens our room to the computer that holds our collective knowledge, is powered by the movement of electrons. Electromagnetism is the fundamental force that governs this movement. Our power grids are massive, intricate systems designed to generate and transmit these electrons over vast distances. They are a triumph of human ingenuity, but they are also incredibly fragile and deeply susceptible to both physical and digital attack. An electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, whether from a high-altitude nuclear detonation or a non-nuclear weapon, would not just cut the power. It would send a surge of energy through every electrical system, essentially frying the circuits of everything from power transformers to our tiny handheld devices. Imagine the suddenness of it all. The world goes silent. The low hum of the refrigerator, the gentle flicker of the screen, the distant roar of a city at night, all of it gone. The sudden silence would be as deafening as any explosion. This isn't just about a power outage. It's about the complete and total collapse of the electrical grid. A collapse that would be almost impossible to repair in a world at war. We are a species of light and sound, but in this new reality, we would be a species of darkness and quiet. This brings us to a fascinating and little-known scientific fact. Our modern world is so dependent on electricity that we have forgotten the deep, primordial rhythm of the day and night. There's a biological process in all of us called the circadian rhythm, a kind of internal clock that regulates our sleep-wake cycle, our body temperature, and our hormonal activity. This rhythm is primarily synchronized by light. In our modern world of electric lights, we have effectively tricked our bodies into thinking it's always day. But in a world without electricity, our circadian rhythms would reassert themselves with a vengeance. Our sleep cycles would become more erratic. Our bodies would struggle to regulate themselves, and a collective biological shock would set in. We would be thrust back into a world where the sun and the moon are our only clocks, a world where the night is truly dark and the stars, for the first time in generations, would be a constant, visible presence. And this raises a profound and very human philosophical question. What is the nature of civilization when its foundational infrastructure is gone? For us, civilization is the sum of our technology, our art, our literature, our systems of governance. But what if all of that is dependent on a single invisible force? What if our civilization is just an elaborate play being performed on a stage, powered by electricity? When the lights go out, does the play end, or does it simply change? Do we stop being civilized? The truth is, we don't really know. We have never had to face a global technological regression of this magnitude. It's a situation that forces us to question what is truly essential to our humanity. Is it the knowledge we have stored on servers, or the knowledge we carry in our minds? Is it the connections we have on social media, or the connections we have with the people standing next to us? A world unplugged would be a world of shadows, but it would also be a world of new forgotten realities. The stars would come out. The quiet would return. The sound of our own voices and the stories we tell around a fire would once again become the dominant form of communication. This quiet hum of nothing, this profound and unsettling silence, would be the most important sound of all. It would be the sound of our civilization's end and the sound of a new, more difficult beginning. The lights have gone out. The hum of our interconnected world has faded into a profound, unsettling silence. We are now in a world unplugged, where the old maps no longer apply. This is where we begin to explore the new cartographers, the people who, in the absence of nations and borders as we know them, would begin to redraw the world. This is not about political summits or treaties. It is about the fundamental human need to organize to find order in chaos and to build communities from the scattered fragments of a fallen civilization. To understand this process, let's turn to the concept of emergent behavior in complex systems. It's a fascinating idea from fields like biology and computer science. Emergent behavior is when a group of simple individual agents, all following a basic set of rules, come together to create a complex collective behavior that none of the individual agents could have produced on their own. Think of a flock of birds flying in perfect synchronized patterns. No single bird is telling the others where to go. They are all simply following a few basic rules like stay close to your neighbor and hey, don't run into anyone. The beautiful complex pattern of the flock emerges from these simple local interactions. Now apply this idea to a world in ruins. The old rules, the laws of nations, the authority of governments, the systems of commerce have all dissolved. What would emerge in their place? People driven by the most basic rules of survival and community would begin to cluster together. These clusters wouldn't be based on old national identities, but on proximity, on shared resources, on a mutual need for protection. A neighborhood might become its own sovereign entity, its new border, the old main street. A group of survivors in a farming community might form an alliance with a nearby town that has a well and a small operational hospital. The new maps would not be drawn by politicians with pens, but by people with a shared goal and a sense of belonging. The power structures that would emerge would be small, local, and fiercely independent. This leads us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about human social organization. There's a concept in sociology called the Dunbar number, named after the anthropologist Robin Dunbar. He proposed that the average human can only maintain stable social relationships with a limited number of people, a number he estimated to be around 150. This number, it is theorized, is a cognitive limit to the size of a social group that can be sustained by direct interpersonal contact. In a world without large centralized governments and mass communication, this number might become a kind of natural law. Our societies would shrink to a size that our brains can handle. We would no longer be a nation of millions, but a community of a few hundred, and our sense of identity would be tied not to an abstract flag, but to the faces of the people we see and interact with every single day. The new cartographers would be drawing the maps of our minds, not just our land. And this raises a profound and humbling philosophical question. Is the state a natural form of human organization? Or is it an artificial construct, a kind of necessary fiction that we all agree to believe in? For all of our history, we have been a species of small tribes and villages. The modern nation-state is, in the grand scheme of things, a very recent invention. So in a world where that invention has been unmade, do we revert to our natural state? Is the tribe, the small community, the true and most resilient form of human society? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. We have become so accustomed to the idea of nations that it's hard to imagine a world without them. But this thought experiment forces us to consider that perhaps our most powerful and enduring form of organization is not the one we have built on a grand scale, but the one we can build with our own two hands, with our own small circle of companions. So as we imagine the new world, let's look for the new cartographers. They are not in a command center or a war room. They are the people huddling together for warmth, the ones sharing a meal from a salvaged garden, the ones standing guard at the edge of their makeshift community. They are drawing the new maps, not with lines of ink, but with lines of trust, and the new borders are not defined by political agreements, but by the strength of their resolve and the warmth of their collective fire. The new cartographers are at work, their communities slowly taking shape in the quiet aftermath of the collapse. But as humanity begins to rebuild, we must confront the terrible lasting legacy of what has been done. This is the story of the Gardens of Ash, a world where the very soil, the air, and the water have been irrevocably altered. This is where we step beyond the human cost and into the ecological fallout, a profound and somber chapter in our shared story. To understand the scale of this change, we must first think about the scientific concept of the biogeochemical cycles. These are the pathways by which chemical elements, like carbon, nitrogen, and water, move through the biotic living and abiotic non-living parts of our planet. They are the great silent engines that keep our world running, from the water cycle that gives us rain to the carbon cycle that sustains plant life. A global conflict of this magnitude wouldn't just disrupt these cycles, it would shatter them. The release of vast amounts of pollutants, radioactive materials, and greenhouse gases would fundamentally alter the chemistry of our planet, leading to consequences that would unfold over centuries. Think about a small campfire and the smoke it produces. Now multiply that by 1,000 times, and then 1,000,000. That's a tiny fraction of the scale we're talking about. The most immediate and terrifying effect would be the concept of a nuclear winter. This isn't just a grim sci-fi fantasy. It's a scientific model that has been studied for decades. The burning of cities and forests, the sheer amount of dust and soot thrown into the atmosphere, would block out a significant portion of the sun's light. The world's temperature would plummet, crops would fail, and the delicate balance of ecosystems would be thrown into chaos. The gardens of ash would be not just a metaphor, but a literal reality, as the fertile soil of our world is choked by a fine layer of soot and debris. This brings us to a little-known but deeply unsettling scientific fact about epigenetics. We often think of our DNA as a fixed blueprint, but epigenetics is the study of how environmental factors can change the way our genes are expressed. A sudden dramatic shift in the global environment, extreme cold, widespread radiation, new kinds of pollutants wouldn't just affect the people and animals alive at the time. It would change the way their genes are turned on and off. The survivors of this ecological catastrophe could pass on these epigenetic changes to their children and grandchildren. The ghost of the war would be carried not just in our memories, but in our very genetic code. It's a biological echo that could ripple through the generations, a silent and profound wound to our collective heritage. And here we are confronted with a humbling and deeply philosophical question. Is the Earth a resilient system that can always heal itself? Or have we finally reached a point where our destructive power has exceeded the planet's capacity to recover? We've always operated under the assumption that nature in the end will find a way. We see forests regrow after fires and rivers run clean again after pollution is stopped. But what if the damage is so profound, so widespread, that there is no after? What if we have not just poisoned a single river, but the entire planet? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. We have never seen a large-scale nuclear exchange, and the long-term ecological consequences are at best educated guesses. This raises an interesting question. Is it possible for us to cause a wound so deep that the patient, in this case, our planet, can never truly recover? The gardens of ash would be a constant visible reminder of our hubris. The trees that once gave us oxygen and shelter would be skeletal remains. The rivers that once gave us water would be choked with pollutants. The sky, once blue and full of life, would be a perpetual dusty gray. And in this desolate new world, the true measure of a new beginning would not be a victory, but a single green shoot pushing its way through the irradiated soil, a tiny defiant promise of life in a world we have all but killed. The gardens of ash are a silent testament to our hubris. The trees are gone, the rivers are poisoned, and a new terrible quiet has fallen over the world. We've imagined the physical and ecological aftermath, but now we must turn inward to the human soul, to the profound cost that cannot be measured in land or resources. This is the story of a symphony of silence, the silent, unending echo of loss, and the way a world at war not only kills bodies, but also destroys the very psychological landscape of those who survive. To understand this, let's look at the scientific concept of collective trauma. We often think of trauma as an individual experience a deeply personal wound. But a global conflict would be a shared collective experience of unimaginable scale. It's a trauma that would be woven into the fabric of society itself, passed down from one generation to the next. The neuroscientist Bessel van der Kolk, in his work on trauma, has described how it doesn't just affect our minds, it fundamentally changes our brains. It can alter our perception of the world, making us hypervigilant and fearful, unable to feel safe even in moments of peace. In a world defined by a symphony of silence, the collective trauma would be a constant low-frequency hum of anxiety, a shared wound that no one could ever fully heal. Imagine the absence of a sibling, a parent, a child, the absence of a friend, a neighbor, a lover. In our current world, we have rituals for this absence, funerals, memorials, quiet moments of shared grief. But in a world where millions have died, where entire cities have been vaporized, where there are no bodies to bury and no graves to visit, how do we grieve? The silence would be filled not with the comforting words of mourners, but with an immense, terrifying void. This is the sound of the symphony of silence, the sound of a world trying to mourn a loss so great it has no language for it. This brings us to a little-known but deeply relevant scientific fact about memory and loss. There's a psychological phenomenon called mourning without a body, often seen in the families of soldiers missing in action or victims of mass disasters. Without a physical body, without the closure of a funeral, the grieving process can be profoundly different. It can be a kind of unending looping search for an answer that will never come. In the aftermath of a global conflict, this wouldn't be the experience of a few families. It would be the experience of an entire world. Every person would be a walking ghost, haunted by the memories of those who simply vanished, leaving nothing but an empty space in the world. And this raises a profound and deeply philosophical question. Is there a limit to the human capacity for grief? Can the soul of a civilization be broken not just by the physical destruction of its cities, but by the sheer overwhelming weight of its loss? We have always told ourselves that we are a resilient species, that we can endure anything. But what if there is a point where the scale of the suffering is so great that it becomes a kind of psychological singularity, a point beyond which our minds can no longer comprehend or process the pain? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. The human mind is a theater of infinite possibilities, but it also has its breaking point. This is the great terrifying unknown of the symphony of silence. The silent symphony would also be the sound of stories untold. Every person who died carried with them a universe of knowledge, of dreams, of love, of fear. 1,000,000 small stories, each one unique and precious, would be snuffed out. The collective memory of our species would be a shattered vase, its pieces scattered to the wind. The silence is not just the absence of noise, it's the absence of those stories, the absence of those voices, the absence of a shared past. And in that silence, we would be forced to confront the terrible, unanswerable question of what we have lost and who we have become. The symphony of silence echoes with the weight of untold stories and unmourned losses. But as the human soul struggles to cope, we must also recognize a parallel profound destruction, the loss of our shared intellectual heritage. This is the story of the library of shattered memories, a world where the vast interconnected repository of human knowledge has been fragmented, corrupted, and lost. We have become accustomed to the idea that information is a click away, but what happens when the click returns nothing and the information is simply gone? To grasp the scale of this loss, let's consider the scientific concept of entropy. In physics, entropy is a measure of the disorder, randomness, or uncertainty in a system. It's a fundamental law of the universe that the entropy of an isolated system will always increase over time. Think of a pristine library, its books neatly organized and cataloged. This is a state of low entropy. But a fire, a flood, or a series of targeted attacks on data centers and universities would introduce an immense amount of disorder. The knowledge would not just be destroyed, It would be scattered, its pieces mixed together in a chaotic jumble of corrupted data and burned pages. The library of shattered memories is a state of high entropy, a world where the collective knowledge of our species has been reduced to dust. Imagine the simple act of trying to find out how to purify water or how to restart a simple machine. In our world, a quick search on the internet would provide 1,000 different answers. But in a world without the internet, without the vast digital libraries and the servers that hold them, this simple act becomes an odyssey. The knowledge would not be lost forever, but it would be fragmented, held in the minds of a few scattered survivors, or hidden away in the physical pages of books that were lucky enough to escape the destruction. The knowledge would become a kind of precious local commodity, and its scarcity would be a constant painful reminder of everything we had. This brings us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about cultural memory. Memory, we often assume, is something that resides in our brains. But a huge part of our memory as a species is externalized. It's in our books, our films, our music, our digital records. It's the story we tell ourselves about who we are and where we came from. In a world where this external memory has been shattered, our cultural identity would be deeply fractured. People would not just be struggling to remember how to build a radio. They would be struggling to remember who Shakespeare was, or what a symphony sounded like, or what our world looked like before it was covered in ash. The loss would be not just technological, but profoundly spiritual. And this raises a philosophical question that cuts to the very heart of our being. Do we exist as a species if we can no longer remember our own story? Is a civilization defined by its present or by its memory of the past? We are a species of storytellers. We use stories to teach, to inspire, to warn, and to remember. In a world without those stories, without the great library of shattered memories, what would we tell the children who are born into this new, desolate reality? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. We have never had to face a collective amnesia of this scale. This raises an interesting question. If the past is not just something that happened, but a living, breathing part of who we are, what does it mean to be alive in a world where that past has been erased? The library of shattered memories is not a place. It's a state of being. It's the feeling of a profound collective forgetfulness, a kind of cultural blankness that forces us to start over. But even in this great darkness, a single flickering candle of hope might still burn. The knowledge might be scattered, but it is not entirely gone. The stories might be fragmented, but they are not entirely silent. And in the long, quiet nights, the new generations would begin the slow, painful process of piecing together the broken fragments of trying to remember who we were, so they can begin to imagine who they might become. The library of shattered memories is scattered, and the world is lost in a symphony of silence. We have looked into the abyss of destruction and loss, but it is in the profound stillness that follows a great fire that the first whispers of a new dawn can be heard. This is where we begin to turn our gaze towards recovery, not as a quick fix, but as a slow, painful, and ultimately beautiful process. We are going to explore how life in all its resilience would begin to reassert itself in the desolate gardens of ash. The scientific concept that guides us here is regeneration. In biology, regeneration is the process of renewal, restoration, and growth that makes genomes, cells, organisms, and ecosystems resilient to natural fluctuations or events that cause disturbance or damage. A starfish can regrow a lost arm. A lizard can regrow a lost tail. The human body, in a less dramatic way, is constantly regenerating its cells. In a world defined by a catastrophic event, this biological principle would become a powerful metaphor for our collective journey. The world, in its own slow geological time, would begin to heal. The oceans, while polluted, would still be vast, and their deep currents would continue to circulate, slowly diluting the poisons. The atmosphere, once choked with soot, would slowly begin to clear as the dust settles and rain washes the sky. The first green shoots pushing through the irradiated soil would not just be plants, they would be a kind of biological defiance, a tiny determined act of regeneration. This brings us to a little-known, but deeply inspiring scientific fact about extremophiles. These are organisms, mostly microorganisms, that thrive in physically or geochemically extreme conditions that are detrimental to most life on Earth. There are extremophils that live in volcanic vents at the bottom of the ocean in the frozen ice of Antarctica, and in environments with extreme radiation. In a world scarred by war, these tiny resilient life forms would be the first pioneers of a new ecosystem. They would be the ones to break down the pollutants, to fix the damaged soil, to create the conditions for more complex life to return. The whispers of a new dawn would not be the sound of human voices, but the silent, relentless work of these microscopic architects of a new world. And this raises a profound and very human philosophical question. Is hope a choice, or is it a kind of fundamental biological imperative? We often talk about hope as a feeling, a belief in a better future. But what if it's more than that? What if the same biological drive that makes a starfish regrow its arm or a tiny extremophile thrive in a toxic environment is also the source of our own capacity to hope? Is our ability to rebuild, to create, to find beauty in the ruins just a more complex manifestation of the same regenerative principle that governs all life? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. But in the desolate landscape of a fallen world, the act of planting a seed, of telling a story to a child, of reaching out a hand to a neighbor, would be more than just a gesture. It would be a profound act of faith in the regenerative power of life itself. The new dawn wouldn't be a sudden sunrise. It would be a slow, quiet, and difficult emergence. The whispers of this new dawn would be the rustle of a new kind of grass growing in the cracks of a ruined street, the trickle of water in a stream that had once run dry, the gentle sound of a human voice telling a story that had been almost lost to the great library of shattered memories. It would be a sound so soft that you would have to listen closely to hear it, a whisper so gentle that you might mistake it for a dream. The whispers of a new dawn have begun to emerge, soft and hesitant. We have looked at the slow regenerative healing of the natural world, but now we must turn our attention back to the human world, to the way we would begin to connect with one another in this new fragmented reality. This is the story of the language of ruin, a tale of how communication itself would evolve from the ashes of a fallen civilization. When the old words lose their meaning and the old networks are gone, how do we find a way to speak to each other? To understand this, let's turn to the scientific concept of creolization in linguistics. A creole is a stable natural language developed from a mixture of different languages. It's a language that emerges when people from different linguistic backgrounds are forced to communicate with each other, and they build a new language out of the fragments of their old ones. In a world where nations and borders have dissolved, where people from all corners of the globe are living in small, isolated communities, this process would not just be a possibility, it would be a necessity. The language of ruin would be a kind of social creole, a new dialect born from a shared catastrophe. It would be a mixture of old words and new symbols, of hand gestures and shared glances, a language designed not for nuance and poetry, but for survival and solidarity. Imagine a small community of survivors, a doctor from Japan, an engineer from Brazil, a farmer from Russia, a poet from the United States. Their old languages would be a barrier, but their shared humanity would be a bridge. They would create a new vocabulary, a new way of speaking that is born from the things they have to do every day. A salvaged piece of technology might be given a new name, a new kind of food might be described with a new word, a new kind of social contract might be expressed with a new phrase. The language of ruin would be a kind of living archive, a constant evolving testament to the experience of a new world. This brings us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about human brain plasticity. Our brains are not fixed. They are constantly changing and adapting to new stimuli. This is a concept known as neuroplasticity. The regions of our brain that are responsible for language would, in this new reality, be forced to work in new and different ways. We would become masters of nonverbal communication, of reading faces and body language with an intensity that we have lost in our digital world. The poet would learn to describe a sunset, not with 1,000 words, but with a single carefully chosen gesture. The engineer would learn to explain a complex mechanism, not with a detailed manual, but with a simple, clear diagram drawn in the dirt. The language of ruin would be a kind of beautiful, brutal poetry, a language of necessity and resilience. And this raises a profound and humbling philosophical question. Is language a tool for describing the world, or is it a tool for creating it? We often think of language as a way to reflect the reality around us. But what if language is also a way to build a new reality, to give form to the formless, to find meaning in the meaningless? In a world of ruin, the act of giving something a new name would be a kind of magic, a way of bringing it into being. The truth is, we don't really know for sure what the true power of language is. But this thought experiment forces us to consider that perhaps its greatest power lies not in its ability to describe the past, but in its ability to give us a way to imagine a future. The language of ruin would be a constant living reminder of our shared journey. It would be a language of survival, but it would also be a language of hope, a language that proves that even in the greatest of silences, the human voice, in whatever form it takes, will always find a way to be heard. The language of ruin is taking shape, a testament to our enduring need to connect. We have imagined the slow, painful process of regeneration and the birth of new ways of communicating. Now, as we begin to rebuild our world, let's lift our gaze from the broken ground and turn it upwards. This is the story of the stars above the smoke, a reflection on how our relationship with the cosmos would fundamentally change in a world without electric light. It's a return to a kind of ancient wonder, a powerful reminder of our smallness and our place in a universe that is far vaster than our human conflicts. To understand this, let's consider the scientific concept of light pollution. In our modern world, we live under a constant, pervasive blanket of artificial light. The glow from our cities, our streets, and our homes reflects off of dust and moisture in the atmosphere, creating a kind of perpetual twilight that obscures the night sky. For most of us, the stars are a distant, faint memory, a constellation or two visible on a clear night if we are lucky. But a world unplugged would be a world without light pollution. The sudden profound darkness would be a shock to our senses, but it would also be a gift. Imagine the first night after the lights have gone out. As your eyes adjust to the darkness, the sky would begin to reveal itself in a way that most of us have never seen. The Milky Way, that vast, shimmering river of stars that is the very heart of our galaxy, would become a prominent feature in the night sky. The planets, no longer competing with the glow of streetlights, would shine with a newfound brilliance. The constellations, once just fuzzy patterns we had to search for, would be sharp and clear, a map drawn in the heavens that our ancestors knew intimately, but we have all but forgotten. The sky above the smoke would be a constant, breathtaking reminder of the universe we live in. This brings us to a little-known but deeply moving scientific fact about stellar navigation. Before the invention of the compass and the GPS, sailors, explorers, and travelers of all kinds used the stars to find their way. The North Star, or Polaris, was a constant, reliable point in the sky that told them where north was. The position of other stars and constellations could tell them the time, the season, and their approximate location on the globe. In a world without our modern technology, we would be forced to relearn this ancient art. The stars would no longer be just a source of poetic inspiration. They would be a tool for survival, a constant guide in a world where all other landmarks have been destroyed or are no longer recognizable. And this raises a profound and truly humbling philosophical question. In a world where our human endeavors have created such chaos and destruction, does looking at the stars give us a sense of perspective, a kind of cosmic solace. When we see the vastness of the universe and the endless silent procession of stars that have been burning for billions of years, do our petty squabbles and our terrible conflicts seem a little less important? The truth is, we don't really know for sure what effect this would have on the human psyche. But we can hope that in this new silent world, the stars above the smoke would be a powerful constant reminder that we are all just tiny temporary inhabitants of a single fragile planet, and that our greatest achievement would not be to conquer each other, but to simply survive together under the same vast sky. We have gazed at the stars above the smoke, finding a kind of cosmic solace in their silent witness. The world is beginning to heal, new languages are forming, and humanity is slowly reorienting itself under a newly visible sky. But this quiet period of reconstruction would be fragile, a brittle piece built on the ruins of the old world. This is where we must turn our attention to the architects of this brittle piece, the people who would be tasked with building a new global order not from a position of strength, but from a position of profound weakness and shared loss. To understand the immense challenge they would face, let's consider the scientific concept of game theory. Game theory is the study of strategic decision-making, where the outcome of a person's choice depends on the choices of others. In our old world, with its complex web of treaties, alliances, and economic dependencies, the game was incredibly complex with a vast number of players and an even vaster number of possible moves. But in a world in ruins, the game would be simpler, but far more brutal. The players would be the small isolated communities we talked about earlier, and their strategic decisions would be based on the most basic of human needs: survival. Do we share our resources with a neighboring community, or do we hoard them for ourselves? Do we form an alliance for mutual protection, or do we see every other community as a potential threat? The brittle piece would be a constant, delicate negotiation between these competing interests. Imagine a small farming community with a supply of clean water and food. A neighboring community with no such resources approaches them. The architects of this brittle piece would be the people in the farming community who have to make a choice. If they share, they might not have enough for themselves. If they don't, they risk a conflict that could destroy them both. This is not a choice between right and wrong. It's a choice between two equally terrifying possibilities. And the decisions made in these moments would not just determine the fate of a few people. They would lay the foundation for a new kind of global morality. A morality born not of abstract ideals, but of hard, brutal necessity. This brings us to a strange and little-known scientific fact about human cooperation. There's a phenomenon in social psychology called the robber's cave experiment, where two groups of boys were put in a competitive environment and quickly developed strong in-group loyalties and out-group prejudices. But when they were forced to work together on a task that required both of their cooperations, like fixing a broken water pipe, the animosity between them quickly dissolved. They had a superordinate goal that was more important than their differences. In a world in ruins, the superordinate goal would be the same for everyone's survival. The architects of a brittle piece would have to constantly remind people of this shared goal to emphasize our common humanity in the face of our divisions. And this raises a profound and deeply unsettling philosophical question. Is peace a natural state of being? Or is it an artificial construct, something that we must constantly strive for and build with our own two hands? We have always told ourselves that peace is the absence of war. But what if peace is something much more active than that? What if it's a constant, fragile negotiation, a kind of collective act of will that we must perform every single day? The truth is, we don't really know for sure. The history of our species is a history of both war and peace, and it's hard to tell which is the exception and which is the rule. This raises an interesting question in a world where the old structures of power have been erased. Do we have the wisdom and the courage to build something better in their place? Or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes all over again? The architects of a brittle piece would be the philosophers, the storytellers, and the leaders of these small communities. They would not be building empires or nations. They would be building trust. And in a world where trust has been shattered, this would be the most difficult and the most important work of all. The peace they would create would be fragile, but it would be a peace nonetheless, a fragile shelter from the storm they have all survived. The architects of a brittle peace are at work their efforts a fragile shelter from the storm. We have journeyed through the terror of a world at war and the slow, painful work of its recovery. We have seen the stars above the smoke and heard the whispers of a new dawn. Now, as our long story comes to a close, we must take the longest view of all. This is the story of the gentle tide of time, a final philosophical reflection on how even the most catastrophic events eventually become memories, and how the slow, inexorable march of time ultimately reclaims everything, offering a sense of perspective and solace. To understand this, let's consider a concept from geology and astronomy: deep time. Deep time is the idea that the age of the Earth and the universe is so immense that human history is but a tiny, insignificant sliver of a second in its vast expanse. The mountains we see today were once seabed. The continents are still drifting, moving at the speed of our fingernails growing. The stars we look at are millions of light years away, and the light we see left them before our species even existed. In the grand sweep of deep time, a third world war, as terrible as it would be nothing more than a brief, violent tremor. The scars on the Earth would eventually be covered by new layers of rock and soil. The languages we spoke would be forgotten, and the cities we built would be reduced to dust. The gentle tide of time would reclaim it all. Imagine the planet 1,000 years from now, a new civilization living on the ruins of our own. They would find our artifacts, our old technologies, our broken monuments. They would try to piece together the story of who we were, and they would probably get a lot of it wrong, just as we have done with the civilizations that came before us. For them, our global conflict would be a kind of myth, a vague, distant memory from a time they can barely comprehend. The gentle tide of time would have washed away the details, leaving behind only the most fundamental truths. This brings us to a little-known but powerful scientific fact about memory consolidation. Our memories are not like perfect recordings. They are dynamic and constantly being reshaped. In psychology, memory consolidation is the process by which a memory becomes stable in the brain. But over time, memories can fade, become distorted, or be rewritten. On a societal level, this is how history works. The events of the past are not a fixed record. They are a story we constantly tell ourselves and rewrite, a story that changes with each new generation. The gentle tide of time would not just physically erase the evidence of the war. It would also, in a slow psychological way, begin to erase the memory of it. The pain would fade, the anger would subside, and all that would be left is a quiet sense of loss and a profound appreciation for the peace they have. And this raises a final and deeply comforting philosophical question. Does time heal all wounds, or does it simply help us forget? We often say that time is a great healer, but perhaps its true power is in its ability to give us perspective, to show us that even the most terrible things are temporary, and that life in the end will always find a way to reassert itself. The truth is, we don't really know for sure. But in the quiet aftermath of a world in ruins, the gentle tide of time would be a constant, powerful, and a deeply soothing presence. It would be the sound of the wind moving through the new forests, the sound of the rain washing the sky, the sound of a new generation's laughter. It would be the sound of a world that has in the end moved on. The journey is almost over, my friend. We've come a long way together, haven't we? From the quiet hum of a peaceful world, to the deafening symphony of silence, and finally, to this quiet, contemplative moment. I'd like to gently ask one last time, where is the place you're staying now? The time in that place at this very moment, how is it flowing? I hope the journey has not been frightening, but rather a kind of strange and beautiful lullaby, a story that has helped you see the world a little differently. Now, as the words slowly fade, I invite you to bring your awareness back to the gentle weight of your own body, to the soft rhythm of your own breathing. Let the images we've created together slowly dissolve like smoke in a clear night sky. Let the world we have built in our minds gently fade away. Sleep well, my companion. Wherever and whenever you are, thank you for listening. Sweet dreams.